On yesterday's podcast, myself and Mike McAllister went over the top pass catchers for Syracuse and Georgia Tech.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Now let's talk about a pair of weapons on both sides. We obviously have Oronde Gadsden, the All-American tight end. They have Eric Singleton, who is one of the better receivers in the ACC. He's off to a little bit of a slow start. Eric Singleton has 6 catches for barely above 60 yards and I believe a touchdown. So it's not going to be about shutting down Eric Singleton. Mike, what I'm going to ask you is, how can Syracuse keep Singleton staying neutralized?
Well, I think the biggest thing is when you look at Georgia Tech's receivers, him and the guy Malik Rutherford is actually their leading receiver right now with 11 catches, almost 200 yards and a touchdown so far. Those two guys are 5'9" and 5'11". Now, they've got Avery Boyd, who's kind of their third wide receiver, who's about 6'3". They've got Chase Lane, who's about 6 foot, but neither of those guys are primary focuses of the offensive attack. Rutherford and Singleton are the top 2 guys. Neither of them are very big in stature. So I think that gives Syracuse, with the length that it has at corner, to really be physical with those guys and to disrupt their timing with their length, with their physicality. That's the biggest thing is, of course, you want to have a pass rush. And we saw one of the more encouraging things from the defense last week was that they had 4 sacks against Ohio. Fadil Diggs,
2 of them.
Yes, he's I think I tweeted out after his second one, is good at football. That's my expert analysis on that one. And he is. He's awesome. This is a game where he could have a huge impact. Obviously, getting pressure on Haynes King is huge. That disrupts the timing from that standpoint. But even if you don't, the defensive backs have an opportunity to get their hands on the Georgia Tech wide receivers, be physical with them, get them off of their route. Don't make their first step be as easy as they want it to be, and disrupt timing from that perspective. So that's kind of where I look at it, is I think Syracuse has a size advantage there when you're looking at Georgia Tech's skill position players offensively versus Syracuse's skill position players defensively. That's something that could play into Syracuse's advantage. Otherwise, it's being smart. The first, I'd say about 3/4 of the game against Ohio, I thought the coverage by the Syracuse defense was pretty good. Yeah, they were on top of Ohio's receivers. I know Georgia Tech's receivers are significantly more talented, but we go with what we've seen so far. I thought they showed good coverage skills, good instincts, tackled almost immediately after the catch. And then as the fourth quarter went along, they kind of got a little bit softer. And I think part of that was, sort of playing prevent and trying to prevent the big play.
I almost discount that. I just kind of throw that away. Like, it's soft zone. I mean, we saw DJ for Florida State end up with 270 yards passing. Like, how's that even possible?
And no one thought he had
it's garbage time.
Yeah, nobody thought he had I called for him to be benched midway through the game. So the point is, I think there's an opportunity here for Syracuse to blanket those wide receivers. Now, Georgia Tech is going to be more sophisticated in terms of the routes that it runs. They're going to be more deliberate in terms of trying to get their receivers the ball. Ohio really wanted to rely on the running game and be really physical up front. Georgia Tech, of course, wants to run the ball, but it's going to be a little bit of a different approach because they want to get the ball into the hands of those 2 players, Rutherford and Singleton, to try to allow them to make plays in space. So from Syracuse perspective, use the length to your advantage, get your hands on them at the line of scrimmage, be smart and disciplined. And then once they get the ball, get them down. They're going to complete some passes. They're going to get some first downs. Don't let the 12-yard play turn into a 35-yard play. Don't let the 3-yard pass on 3rd and 10 turn into a 15-yard gain and first down and keeping a drive alive. Those are the things that I think Syracuse has to focus on in this game.
And we saw Syracuse pick up a 3rd and 13 with Trevor Pena, where he caught the ball about 7 yards behind the line to gain and was able to run for a first down. I know Ohio's defense in that it was great blocking on Syracuse's end, but you have to be able to shed those blocks. Like at the end of the day, you just have to, when you have that much time to be able to shed a block before the line to gain, you just have to do it. So that's a big key for Syracuse. I do want to give credit, though, to the Georgia Tech secondary, because obviously Oronde Gadsden is going to be a big factor in the game plan. He's always going to be a big factor in the game plan. He's the best weapon that Syracuse has.
No question.
Georgia Tech has not allowed a single pass catcher this season yet. It's been 8 quarters to go over 70 yards in a game. Think about that for a second. Not a single one.
Yeah. That's impressive, especially when you consider the fact that Georgia State was trailing by multiple scores for most of that game. And so they were basically throwing the ball almost the entire second half. Now, that said, Florida State, most of their success that they had against Georgia Tech, they were really trying to pound the ball. They were trying to run the ball at Georgia Tech because Georgia Tech struggled with that last year.
And they struggled against Georgia State, I think. I think they gave up 150 yards rushing to Georgia State, and Georgia State lost by like 3 touchdowns.
Yes. And Georgia State did run the ball well early, and there was a point early in the second half where it seemed like there was a chance for Georgia State to get back in the game, but never really materialized. That said, that plays a part of it as well, how teams attacked them, but that's still a factual statement. No one has had over 70 receiving yards against that secondary, even though they don't have any interceptions, even though they only have 1 sack in 2 games. That says that, they've got some guys back there that can cover a little bit. So, even though Syracuse has a lot of weapons, they've got Haynes. Jackson Meeks made an unbelievable catch last week against Ohio. Yep. They've got Oronde Gadsden, as we noted. We didn't even see them throw the ball to Dan Villari. LaQuint Allen made a one-handed catch. Trevor Pena, shout out to that kid for coming back and having the game of his life in his first game back from injury.
I'm a buyer in Trevor Pena, by the way.
Me too. I'm
a believer.
He was fantastic. So they've got a lot of weapons offensively that they can throw the ball to. So it's going to be a little bit different from a Georgia Tech perspective, because this is going to be a significant upgrade in terms of a passing attack than what they played against Florida State, who has a quarterback that seems to just like to check the ball down, doesn't really try to push the ball downfield, and struggles with decision-making and all those things we've seen the first 2 weeks. And a Georgia State team that's talent-wise just not at the same level as a Florida State or a Syracuse. So I think this is going to be the most difficult test for that Georgia Tech secondary. But certainly so far through 2 games, it's hard to really find fault in anything that they've done.
Yeah, they look good in that area. That's why I wanted to point out that stat, that they have not allowed a receiver to go over 70 yards. But you mentioned the lack of pressure that they typically have, or that, 1 sack in 2 games. I know that sacks are not everything, but if you only have 1 sack in 2 games, you're probably not getting a lot of pressure on the quarterback, because if you get more pressures, you're going to get sacks. It's just how it works. So the key really is it's not obviously the offensive line and everything, but it's to get open. The receivers just have to get open, because you have to figure that the offensive line is going to be able to hold up against this Georgia Tech front. Now it's about the receivers being able to create separation, and guys like Oronde Gadsden obviously being the main catalyst of it. If you had to say, is there any X factor that you think is going to play a big role for Syracuse or Georgia Tech on the skill position wise?
I'm wondering if this is a game where we see Zeed Haynes break out a little bit. I was almost expecting early in the game they take a deep shot to him to try to get the crowd into it and sort of make a statement early in the game and get the Fran Brown era off to a huge start, something like that. That never really materialized. They didn't really throw the ball downfield to him. And I'm wondering if that was by design, because Zeed Haynes has blazing speed. He is as fast as it gets in the ACC at the wide receiver position. And I think there's an opportunity to try to stretch the field with him a little bit. So when you've got a guy like Trevor Pena, who just had a fantastic game, as we mentioned, you've got a guy like Oronde Gadsden, who's going to put a ton of pressure on opposing defenses. They're going to be focusing so much on those guys. If you can now get Zeed Haynes one-on-one a couple of times and take some deep shots, we know Kyle McCord is extremely accurate down the field. I think there's an opportunity for some big plays there. So that's something that I look at. But the other part of it is, you mentioned the Syracuse offensive line. There were a few occasions against Ohio where Ohio did get some pressure on Kyle McCord. And I think Georgia Tech's athletes at the defensive line, even though they haven't put a ton of pressure on either Georgia State or Florida State, their athletes are better than what Syracuse saw against Ohio.
Yeah.
So how well Syracuse can hold up, specifically those tackles, the 2 transfer tackles, Demetrius Weatherspoon and Savion Washington, how do they hold up against a front line that is, they understand what Syracuse's weapons are. So they're going to try to be getting to McCord as quickly as possible so that he doesn't have time to read the field and find any of those weapons. So I'm really interested. I think those are the two X factors. Can they get Zeed Haynes one-on-one down the field, and then how those tackles hold up against Georgia Tech?
Well, another key, it goes back to, it's like yin and yang with an offense. You want to stop a blitz, run the ball.
That's right.
There you go. Run the ball. If you can
that
run the ball,
down a pass rush as well as anything.
Running the ball, honestly, in football, it changes everything if your team can run the ball. Like, unless you have Patrick Mahomes, you have to be able to run the ball.
Have to.
Like, even the Chiefs need to run the ball with Isaiah Pacheco at times. Like, you have to run the football. So, hey, run the ball. And they run the ball. Good things are going to happen. It's going to open up that pass game. All of a sudden, everyone's kind of creep in. You throw it over the top to a guy like Zeed Haynes.